Welcome, everyone. My name is Atin. For those who don't know me, I am the CEO and co-founder of Countable. But today, we're not talking about Countable. We're talking about something very close to my heart, a topic that I think everybody has been talking rigorously in the last year, mental health. The speaker we have today has a process that he'd like to share that will help you maybe fine-tune some of the things that you're already doing in this process. Please welcome Mike Stroh.
It's great to be here. And my experience, what starts with me, was really born out of my personal and family catastrophes with mental illness, addiction, and then the subsequent recovery joys and the life I get to currently live now. So I eat, sleep, breathe, and live all of this stuff. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I am grateful for this opportunity.
So just to dive into it, I think I wanted to kind of give you a bit of a context around what an accounting life looks like. I think we talked a little bit more about it offline, but just to contextualize it, you're looking at a team of people who, as soon as they come out of the busy time, the holidays time, which is like this in and around the January first week, they start getting into this anxious phase of really putting in 80 to 100 hours sometimes a week. It's a lot of work as a team to put together on a consistent basis for 4 or 5 months without really seeing any light of day. And that takes them away from being together with their family, with their friends. They're literally locked down in an environment. Sometimes they're not getting appreciated by the client for the effort that they're putting in. The team members are, feeling the impact of the trickle-down behavior and frustrations at times that the partner generally have to manage and maintain for all the right reasons. That's just the nature of the game that there has been. So when I talk about it, what do you, just keeping that context in mind, just coming back and virtually saying, what is workplace mental health to you?
The way I understand the broader conversation around workplace mental health is that it's in contemporary economics, so to speak, the changing nature of the workforce. Not only are companies responsible for people's physical well-being as they have been in the past, but now it's shifting into their mental well-being as well. So there's this redefining of what it means to care for employees' mental health or their health in general. And to be specific, the way that it's being interpreted by the people who create the guidelines and the ones who've done a lot of research on it is it's the blend of short-term, long-term disability claims that are specific to mental health problems. It's the associated costs with employee benefits, employee assistance programs, and also now there's employee family assistance programs. And then the impact of that on absenteeism, so how many sick days are people missing because of mental health problems. And then also while at work, there's a term called presenteeism. So while at work, are they actually engaged in the activities they're supposed to be doing? Because right. I think a lot of us can imagine we don't always show up our whole selves and we're not always as productive. So it's sort of a blend of all these different metrics. And I do think we're very much still in the process of bringing substantial clarity to all these things.
From your perspective, if you have to prioritize mental health during this busy time of the year without really burning out, what are some of the key factors that people have to look at when we're just talking about workplace? Currently, we're talking about more as an organization. Maybe later on we'll touch base in an individual for mental health and how that works. But just from an organization perspective, some of the leaders of the organization, what are some of the things they should be doing around this?
I think the first thing is to just acknowledge the perhaps unrealistic assumptions. So in all of our work over the years, what we've really noticed is that companies tend to make a few standard mistakes. So the first one is they think they need a big budget and that they lack human resources to initiate any type of mental health programming in the workplace. They think that, so if they move beyond that assumption and then they say, okay, we're going to invest in something, then they think oh, online training or online education is enough. And then they also think that that awareness or information given to human beings is enough to impact behavior. And then they're also unaware of the profound impact on productivity, performance, group dynamics, and so those are kind of the barriers. So first, just to acknowledge those.
Yep.
And then there's also a difficult understanding between the difference between mental health and mental illness. And so the way we deal with stress is different than how we would support someone who's really in the grips of a mental illness or something like that. You know, if the fire alarms are going off, it's in some sense already too late. So you want to try to implement best practices or guidelines prior to shit hitting the proverbial fan. So what does that look like? And I think that looks like an environment where people are comfortable being honest about what's going on with them. And usually that starts from the top. So it needs to be role modeled from leadership. And if leadership role models a sense of humility and vulnerability, then the rest tend to follow.
There's so much of information anxiety around mental health. So a lot of people get through this stage of, wanting to know about this and then spend some time in understanding it, but they kind of fall short on practicing it. And it could be because of some of the barriers that you mentioned. What are some of the things that they can do as a very basic, immediate steps? It could be 1 or 2 or 3 immediate steps that they can make a significant improvement by letting their employees or team members know that they are doing something around this. It's not formalized, but there's something that they want to take an initiative action, and they can do some sort of a cadence around it, if we can speak to that a little bit.
I think it's a great question because it addresses some of the imagined barriers. So the first thing really is just to say, again, it can depend on the individual, the group, the work environment, but leadership role modeling, taking a break, right? Or bringing in, I don't know, a mindfulness teacher, or it doesn't really matter what it is, but just to do something and say, hey, everybody, we value this. And we're not just saying it, we're showing you with our actions. Yep. So I know we all have 500 things on the to-do list, but I don't care. We're all going to take the afternoon off, or we're going to have a break here, or whatever it is. But it's sort of just about doing something and not talking about it.
Yeah, it kind of takes back, if I look at my partner days when I used to be a partner, I always had this notion in my head that I am late in everything, that I need to get this done, and my client is chasing this, and I need to trickle it down to my staff. And I do not stop to think as to what is my burnout time. I always think about it when I'm already burnt out, not before that. Like, how do you identify when it's okay to say, oh, if I keep doing this, I'm going to burn out very quickly?
Well, the first part is just the awareness. I think one thing people have a hard time, well, I mean, I would say most people never really discover this, but if you're committed to developing self-awareness, you start to realize that you're actually just sort of being almost like a puppet. You're being led through life by your thoughts. You're not actually aware that all you're doing is thinking and identifying with your thinking. So once you can kind of snap out of that and realize that you're just this thought machine, then you can start to notice when you're making all these decisions that are detrimental to your health. I think, that might be one frame to look at it, but we have to get real with ourselves and not try to pretend that what we're doing is okay because the ends justify the means.
Got it. Okay. So so you're putting yourself in a more vulnerable position by saying, if I ask you to do it, you're not as committed, versus you see me do it because you're bought into the vision of the organization, and you see the leaders adapting it. Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. And the second component, you mentioned something which I think brush up on the original idea we discussed offline, was baseline. How do you determine a baseline? So can you expand on that a little bit? How do you know that the person who's getting on the call, or the person who is lacking a little bit, or the person who is struggling, how do you determine, what their baseline is?
I mean, everybody has a different baseline, so to speak. So I think understanding what our normal day, quote unquote, normal day-to-day functioning looks like. So perhaps for individual A, I tend to be incredibly punctual. I'm always in a suit and tie. I never spill coffee on myself, those type of things. I'm very kind of organized in that sense. So for that person, that's their baseline. They're punctual, they're clean cut, all that kind of stuff. That's how they go about their business. Another person might be more casual. They might have coffee stains on their shirt. They might not be as punctual, those type of things. And so we'll use those two people as a frame. That's a baseline, person A, person B. And then, of course, there's people in between that. Yeah. So that's the baseline. So if person A, who's very clean cut, dresses in a suit, etc., very punctual, if they start to be late frequently, consistently, if they start showing up in very casual clothes all of a sudden, so it's the distinct changes in a behavior, in a mood, in a personality, in an appearance that is quite out of the norm for what their normal way of being is. Yeah. And so say you could take it to the other side, right? The person who's much more casual, et cetera. If all of a sudden they're showing up in three-piece tuxes and they're, wiping every little mark off every little desk or whatever, then that's a distinct change in that person's baseline. And it doesn't always mean there's something wrong, but it's an indicator that there might be something going on.
So this is interesting. We establish a baseline as an organization, and then new people are coming in. The culture is always changing. And so how important it is to monitor against that baseline, and can it be scientifically documented in some form or the other, whatever that is? And because, accountants, we're all numbers people. We love to put a perspective. It says, I am this in this category, and then I know what that is. So is there a way to put a structure around it so people can easily follow that process and say, let's do a monitoring and check up on every couple of months to see whether people are off or not, and so on?
It does start with getting clear on how do we even measure mental health, so to speak. So I think on a metrics perspective, we can start to gather information. You might want to do an audit in some sense, or that's an accounting word, isn't it?
I'm almost converting them into accountant very soon.
Yeah. Part of the conversation that is also not clearly articulated is that nobody has really, and when I say nobody, large organizations in the world, even the large government organizations that are pushing for advancement in workplace mental health, nobody has a database of information that's been tracked over a long period of time. So this is all relatively new. There is a lot of evidence that it can be incredibly powerful and profitable for companies to start taking this seriously. So that's encouraging. And it starts with, are we actually spending any money on employee engagement around mental health and well-being? Yeah. How much have we spent? Is there training going on? So you start tracking that. And then you can start tracking, and I'm sure I'll miss a few of the columns, but you can start tracking how much money are we spending on benefits? How much money are we spending on employee assistance programs? How many sick days are people taking? Are people spending? I know one company I worked with, they noticed that their pharmaceutical spending was really high. Mm-hmm. And then they looked into the nature of the pharmaceuticals. So it's obviously not always related to mental health, but they found out 40% of the company costs on pharmaceuticals were going towards the antidepressants. Yeah. So that's pretty profound. And so you can start, if you really have the intention, you can get a lot of great information. And then it's like, okay, well, where's the low-hanging fruit, right? So maybe it's and then you pick that, and then maybe you start there. But I think that first phase of getting clarity, I like the word inventory, kind of we're doing an inventory on what's going on here in relationship to mental health, and then you start making decisions from there.
Can you talk about your 5C program a little bit?
Sure.
I think I'm curious to know more about it, and I think it might help put some structure into what we just talked about to see if what the process usually you follow for large organizations to help them get organized in the mental health.
Yeah, so we have our sort of 5C program is how to create mentally healthy teams that are connected, effective, and purpose-driven. And it's our creative, I guess, also quite well thought out solution to how an organization might implement a workplace mental health strategy. The first one is clarity. So that's similar to what I was just describing, doing the internal audit, the inventory, where are we spending money, what's going on here. Step two is courage. So we have an understanding of what's happening. Do we have the courage? Another people sometimes prefer the word commitment. Can we make the commitment, or do we have the courage to actually start implementing changes? Because the benefits are not quarterly, right? Which is another huge problem with our current kind of short-term interest business structures, is that we anyway, not everyone's like that, of course. So we get courage. Okay, here's the problems we've identified. Here's the holes. Let's move forward. Then the third step, the third C, is creativity. So we've got clarity. We're committed to going through it. Let's use our creativity to imagine what we could actually do here, what can be different, what can change. The fourth C is constancy, which is a beautiful word, in my opinion. It's a blend of patience and persistence. So of course, when you're implementing new plans, and particularly around mental health, it can be challenging, and it can be, you want to give up sometimes. And so you need to have patience and persistence. And then you get through that. You can also do a review, right? So are the things we're actually doing helping? Because if they're not, then we should probably stop and maybe go back a step or two. So it's important to do that review. And then the last piece, compassion, is in our opinion also a must in some sense to advance the cause of human well-being. So we can take our experience of an internal process and the lessons learned and joys and sorrows, et cetera, and then we can share that with the world. So whether that's advising our colleagues in other companies, whether that's talking about it, whether that's writing a book, whether that's donating money, whether that's supporting in the corporate social responsibility stuff, whatever it is. But there's a ton of research, and I think it's pretty self-evident that when we are compassionate to others, give to others, help others, that also increases our own well-being. And it's also linked to employee satisfaction, employee engagement, trust in the company, and all that kind of stuff.
Of all the 5Cs, which one takes the most amount of time from your perspective? And what's a typical timeline to implement this process?
It depends on the size of the organization, of course, and the level of commitment. But typically, our experience has been 6 to 12 months, something like that. And then it can kind of go with, depending on, again, the situation, the success of it, ongoing follow-up and coaching and guidance. But our goal really is teach the teacher kind of thing, right? Or train the trainer. We want to develop teachers and trainers. We don't want to have, this is about empowering people. And so the organization has...
So what you're saying is it's not about bringing somebody in and doing the work, and then when you walk away, you always are dependent on that person. The goal is to look at the organization and the human behavior and use the psychology and emotional intelligence in the best way possible to empower people to be able to live those different state of life and affair that you call it.
Yeah, and then it becomes part of the culture, part of the way the organization just functions. Another way you could think of it is learning how to implement best practices in workplace mental health. And then the core word there is practice. We know this personally. If I'm not practicing meditation, if I'm not practicing calling my mentors and my support people, if I'm not walking the talk, then I lose it quick. And so it's the same thing in an organization. If you're not practicing the principles that you claim to want to implement or embody, then it's more just yappity yap kind of thing. So each one of those modules does have, again, it'll fluctuate depending on the environment, the situations, but typically there's a training for each module. There's scorecards and score sheets and sort of check marks and that kind of thing, and workshops and that for each module. And then,
so if you don't have a lot of energy to spare especially in the busy time of the year, then you're never going to look at it and stop and reflect. And at times I felt like we're all just running around like machines doing something that has to be done, and nobody stopped to say, well, why do I have to do this much? So as the deadline comes closer, the pressure to get it done goes higher, and then frustration level goes higher, and then you're just like running around trying to manage, right? And it is literally a coping mechanism, so to speak. And then in that all that chaos, how do you really find time to pivot and change? I guess it's difficult, so you have to do it when you're a bit relaxed and you're a bit more creative, and then you know that this is going to come every year and you have to prepare for it. So there is 8 months to prepare so you can do better in the 4 months and you don't accumulate that stress. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. I think I can't help, because this is where my thoughts go. To me, it seems ridiculous that our business practices have set up this situation where we can't submit taxes throughout the course of a year. Why is it like this? So I know that that's not an easy win, but I do think it's important to imagine what can be different, and energy can go there. But yeah, this is about practice. It's about a way of life, and it's maybe some people need to see the benefits in totally random domains of their life. So for example, an accountant may love golfing or something like that. And maybe that's a total, what would the word be? Stereotype. But you're shanking your drive off to the right every hole and you're losing your mind. If you experience the same approach of, okay, let's slow down, let's take some breaths, let's get some support. You wouldn't hesitate to go get a golf lesson to hit down the fairway. So it's the same thing when it's other stressors being caught up in your work all the time. Well, can I get help to not shank the ball right every time I hit it, kind of thing?
And so I'm curious, there's a few more questions that I wanted to ask. One was, what is your approach to mental health within your organization? What are some of the things you do to keep a check on it, personally and as an organization?
Personally, and I am learning to walk this line better, I need to remember that other people don't have the same relationship to mental health problems that I do and my past. So for me, in some sense, it's a matter of life and death, right? Or it's a matter of intense suffering or living an enjoyable life. So for me, it's that serious. And so nothing is more important to me than taking care of my mental health. And it may sound silly, but my wife's not more important. My kids are not more important, because if I'm not taking care of myself, then I lose what I have, which is then I become a miserable person and I can't be a dad and I can't be a husband. So that's my answer to that. And that helps me live a wonderful life. When it comes to our little group, our team, I think it helps that I role model that all the time. I'm also very aware of how other people are doing and what is getting in their way. I'm very open and I ask questions. I don't put pressure on people very much, because I know it is a little bit different with deadlines, as you mentioned. With accounting, I mean, deadlines can be helpful in some ways too, but so I'm careful about what does this person actually need right now from me,
Yeah.
and how can I do my best to be helpful to them. And then asking questions is huge, right? Was I a jerk, or was I unhelpful? What could I do to be more helpful? What do you need from me? And then that opens up that trust and that openness where we can have more difficult conversations that ultimately lead to better outcomes for everybody.
Right.
We also have a structure for meetings. And I think this is another thing that can be easy wins for people. We don't always do it, but we have the intention to, is at the beginning of every meeting, we have a 3-minute meditation. We have a check-in where it has nothing to do with the meeting whatsoever. So it's just state feeling, state of body sensation, and then we move on. And then we also kind of stick to our stated values. So our value is to increase human capacity for well-being. So we acknowledge that. And so that sets the tone for the meeting in a way that's really nice. And it just realigns us to our values and what we're actually meeting to do. And so it's sort of integrating it into the culture in everything we do. And
is there any particular routine do you follow to just kind of keep that, especially when
thank you. Yeah,
especially when the stress kind of overcomes and there's just like, how do you develop that feeling of awareness?
Yeah. Thanks. I didn't really answer that question. Over time, it's the same thing with any other skill. The more we stumble, the more we hit our heads, the more we figure out what works, what doesn't work. And so I'd say I try to have a daily meditation practice. I don't always, but I'm pretty consistent with that because I'm so aware of what happens when I don't. I try to get out for walks, do a certain amount of steps every day, or making sure I'm getting movement. I make sure that I call my mentors, as I kind of mentioned before. I have a meditation teacher. Like I have all these kind of things. And then I think in our resources here, I have a little practice sheet, and it's over time, I don't have to be as attentive to it, but I know when I start to be impatient with my kids, angry with them, or impatient with my wife, or for me, and this goes back to that baseline thing, when I start to get really suspicious of other people's behavior, I start getting paranoid about the news. Like, to me, that's a sign that I'm not doing something to take care of myself. And so those are we start to develop that skill set to notice, wow, I'm really being paranoid right now, or I'm really being judgmental of other people, or I'm being hard on myself. Wow. And as I said before, I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. So I got a whole toolbox of things that I can do. I practice self-compassion a lot, which has been a more recent addition to my toolkit over the last, I guess it's been about 4 years since I've really got into that. So those are the things that I try to do. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's really helpful. I wanted to also point out one more thing that would be relevant is, Mike, do you want to talk about the mental fest that's coming up?
Yes, the State of Mind Festival. So
State of Mind Festival.
Yeah, similar to Starts With Me, State of Mind Festival was born out of my personal family irritations with the mental health system, or acknowledgement of where it could improve. So the State of Mind Festival is my attempt, and has become our team's attempt to address those gaps in services and in the way all of this works. So it's 2 components. One is our work with the schools and all the work we do with the students throughout the year. They come together in May during Mental Health Awareness Week, and they celebrate their work. They present to each other. They hear from inspiring speakers. And this year is the first time we're launching the corporate side. We've had little satellite events leading up to pre-COVID, and it's really exciting. So the theme in some sense is how to implement best practices in workplace mental health. And it's a celebration of some amazing leaders in that space, other people doing and who have done inspiring work, well-being practices. I think our kind of saying in some senses, if you believe that becoming an industry leader in workplace mental health is a valuable marker of success, that it creates engaged, resilient, and purpose-driven workplaces and all these other benefits. And if you think the well-being of your colleagues is good for business, then we say state of mind is for you. And we think it's, yeah.
Can you
Go
give
ahead.
us the website information where they can get more information around this?
Sure. The last thing I'll say is one of our goals is to make this conversation enjoyable, right? It's a celebration. I think a lot of the conversation around mental health, and it's not very enthusiastic. It's very kind of problem focused, and we're trying to flip the script on that. So yeah, and I think that's really important, and people really are drawn to that, and all the events we've done over the years. I mean, it's been a beautiful experience. The website is stateofmindfestival.com.
Mike, do you want to just maybe take a few minutes and just do maybe 4 or 5 bullet pointers? That would be useful.
I'd be happy to. I think the first thing I say, and I'm just a messenger of this ancient wisdom, life involves suffering. That is unavoidable. Where we have a choice is, what do we do with that suffering? And so I think part of what adds to people's angst and mental health problems is that they expect it to be different. It's like we have this underlying assumption that we're not supposed to suffer. So I think we need to smash that illusion to pieces. And then once we can accept the fact that life actually is difficult, it presents us with all kinds of unwanted realities. Then we are free. And you mentioned it earlier, we have a choice. We can decide how we respond to situations. So that's where the freedom and the liberation and the resilience builds from. So life is suffering, that's unavoidable, but that's actually a good thing because you have a choice then. What do you do with that? I think number 2 would be, this is probably my favorite quote, you can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. And that just is a reminder that you have to practice. You can't
say that again. Say that again.
Sure. It's a wonderful one. It was drilled into my head early by my greatest mentor. You can't think your way into right action. You have to act your way into right thinking. If our thinking is a little bit flawed and perhaps not as, sophisticated, then the choices we make are not going to promote our well-being. And this is particularly true for people when they're in the grips of a mental health problem. What we do is by taking actions, right? So if I just get up and go to the therapist, or if I just get up and go for a walk or call my support people or whatever it is, then my mind and my thoughts follow and I become healthier that way. So we have to lead with our actions. It's all about behavior, in my opinion. Let your actions do the talking is another way to sum it up. I'd say number 3, if you haven't tried practicing meditation or yoga or mindfulness, these more contemplative, reflective practices, at least try, and don't just pretend to try, actually try, because I think it's very clear that these are probably the most effective ways to reduce psychological distress and to promote happiness and well-being. And I'd say the last one, number 4, would be don't underestimate the power of doing things for other people. So an idea just of being of service. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but there's a beautiful Gandhi quote. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, something like that. And it's an incredible way to free yourself from a sense of loneliness, isolation, etc. And it doesn't have to be some grandiose, I'm going to go save 1 million people, right? It can be open the door for the next person who's walking behind you down the hallway. I mean, it's those little things. So I could probably go on, but
No, this is really helpful.
Leave,
yeah, this is really helpful. And I think we want to leave the audience with something more constructive. Hopefully this was more practical and on point. And I think there are components of it which are behaviorally very difficult to anticipate and even rely on because we haven't experienced it yet. But being an accountant, I can vouch for the fact that my life drastically changed when I showed an ounce of compassion towards others rather than focused on doing things that I wanted it every single day. When I realized and started writing what are some of the things and decisions that I make that are mine and for myself versus I do it for others with any selfless act, it starts to come up that how self-absorbed our mind keeps us being. It's not who we are, it's what our mind keeps us being because it just got tuned to the idea of having the comfort. And then every time you start building that expectation around it that, life should happen the way you expect it and everything. And then the judgment kicks in and a whole bunch of other things. So I think that's a different time, a different day, a different conversation. Mike, I really want to thank you for being here. I think this has been a phenomenal learning for me. Just getting into the mindset. I can't wait for the State of the Mind Festival to participate. Any small little bit, if it takes away for a few days that we can spare in our life, that could improve even ounce of our life in any ways, then I think it's worth doing it. So we definitely feel ourselves committed to bringing more and more people on that. So thank you again for that. Really appreciate it. And thank you for your time.
Yeah. The pleasure is all mine. And thank you.